The protocol officers had 3 scheduled interactions with the Princess Lira before the morning's first formal court obligation, which began at the 9th hour. The interactions were: the review of the day's formal schedule at the 7th hour and 40 minutes, the presentation of the ceremonial correspondence requiring her acknowledgement at the 8th hour, and the protocol confirmation walkthrough at the 8th hour and 30 minutes, during which the day's formal obligations were sequenced, and any adjustments to timing or positioning were communicated. These interactions were conducted with the correct professional courtesy of court staff who understood their function as service, and who performed their function with the thoroughness that the princess's position required. None of them asked how she was. This was not an oversight. It was the correct professional behavior, because the protocol officer's function was to manage the obligations, not to attend to the person managing them. And the distinction was understood by everyone involved and accepted by everyone involved, and was, in Lira's experience, simply the condition of the morning, the way the temperature of the residential wing was a condition of the morning, present, consistent, not the kind of thing that required notation. She had stopped notating it approximately 4 years ago, which was when she had also stopped expecting it to be different, which were related events in the specific way of adjustments that a person makes when the alternative to adjustment is a form of suffering that has no available remedy. The adjustment was not resignation, exactly. It was something more practical, the recognition that the court's protocol officers were not in the business of attending to her as a person, because attending to her as a person was not their business, and that expecting the business to change was the error rather than the business itself. She had made this adjustment, and it had made things more manageable in the specific way that accurate assessments of situations always made things more manageable, even when the situation being accurately assessed was not a comfortable one. What accuracy did not address was the specific quality of the solitude that her position produced, which was not the solitude of being alone. She was never alone, in the literal sense. The security apparatus's continuous monitoring, ensuring that aloneness in the literal sense was not available to her. But the solitude of being in rooms full of people who were attending to things adjacent to her rather than to her, which was a different and more complete kind of solitude than the literal kind, because it occurred in the middle of company, and had therefore nowhere else to be attributed and no obvious remedy. She was 26 years old and had been the most observed person in her world for 26 years, and had found, in the observation's accumulated weight, that observation and attention were not the same thing, and that you could be watched completely and seen not at all, which was a discovery that she had not been able to share with anyone because sharing it would have required someone to share it with, which was the specific circularity of her situation, and the thing that accurate assessment could describe but not resolve. The Joint Cultural Preservation Mission had been granted archive access 6 weeks ago, which was a standard diplomatic accommodation for cultural projects, and which had been processed through the court's administrative channels with the efficiency of something that had no political significance, and therefore moved quickly rather than slowly. The mission's lead archivist, a Terran named Rin Velo, had taken up residency in the Imperial Archive's eastern section and had been there, to the court's general awareness, doing archival work. The court's general awareness of Rin Velo extended to his accreditation, his project brief, and his schedule, which were the elements the administrative channels required. It did not extend further because archivists doing archival work in the Imperial Archive were not elements of the court's active attention. They were background, in the specific sense of the word that meant present and not requiring the foreground's attention. Lira had not noted his presence in the 6 weeks, because the 6th week was when she first encountered him, and the encounter occurred at the 7th hour, which was the hour that the protocol officers had not yet identified as schedulable, and which she had been using for 8 months as the single hour of her day that was not occupied by something that required her to be the Princess Lira, rather than the person who carried that weight. She had been going to the archive's eastern section at the 7th hour, because the archive's eastern section had, at the 7th hour, the quality of a room between purposes, not performing anything, not requiring anything, simply being its own accumulated self. And because 8 months of 7th hours in that room had given her the specific comfort of a place that knew her without the knowing having any implications. She had not expected to find anyone there. In 8 months, she had never found anyone there. She found him at the end of the 6th week, and he did not look up. The document he was reading was from the archive's 3rd collection, which contained the Varath imperial records of the Middle Period. Not the oldest collection and not the most politically significant, but the collection that was, in Rin's professional assessment, the most interesting, because the Middle Period was when the imperial administrative tradition had been forming rather than formed, which meant the documents had the quality of things being worked out rather than things being executed, and worked out things revealed the working out in ways that executed things didn't. He had been reading this particular document, a survey of resource management disputes from the 4th generation of the imperial line, for approximately 40 minutes, and was at the section that addressed the resolution protocols, which were the part he had come to the document for, because the resolution protocols were the thing the court's later administrative tradition claimed to have derived from the Middle Period, and which the Middle Period's actual documents suggested had been derived from something somewhat different, which was a discrepancy that was professionally interesting without being politically significant, and which he was documenting with the care he brought to all discrepancies, which was the care of someone who understood that the value of accurate documentation was its accuracy and not its implications. He was absorbed in the document when the archive's eastern section acquired a new presence, which he registered in the peripheral way of someone who is absorbed in something, and whose awareness of their environment continues at a reduced level that can be upgraded if the environment requires it. The environment did not require it. The presence was quiet and moved to the far end of the long reading table with the quality of someone who knew the room and had a place in it. And he remained absorbed in the document because the document was where his attention was, and the presence at the far end of the table had not done anything that redirected the attention. He worked for another 20 minutes and reached the end of the section, and made his notes in the careful way he made notes, which was the way of someone who understood that the note was a document too, and deserved the same quality of attention as the thing it was noting. Then he looked up to locate the next document in the sequence he had established for the day's work. The person at the far end of the table was looking at something she was holding, which was a document from the eastern section's open shelves, the Varath Imperial History Collection that the court had designated as available to visiting researchers. She was reading with the specific quality of genuine reading, rather than the performed reading that people sometimes did in research contexts to look busy, which was the reading that didn't move. She was in the document, her attention inside it, her presence at the table, the presence of someone who was somewhere the document had taken her. He noted this in the way he noted things, accurately and without elaboration, and located the next document and returned to his work. At the end of the 7th hour, when the archive staff returned for the evening administrative shift, the person at the far end of the table gathered what she had been reading and left with the quality of someone completing a habitual departure, the movement of someone who knew this room and its rhythms, and was leaving on the room's schedule rather than her own. He noted the departure in the same peripheral way. He had noted the arrival and continued his work until his own schedule required him to stop. It was the following day, when the archive's morning staff arrived and conducted the standard pleasantries that the archive's morning staff conducted, that he understood who the person at the far end of the table had been. Because the morning staff's pleasantries included the mention that the Princess Lira had been seen entering the archive's eastern section at the 7th hour, which was her habit according to the staff member who mentioned it. and which the court's administrative record apparently showed as an unscheduled but consistent visit. He processed this information with the same quality he processed all information, which was accurately and without rushing toward conclusions that the information hadn't established. He filed it in the category of, "The person at the far end of the table yesterday is the first daughter of the Vareth imperial line," and updated his understanding of the archive's 7th hour accordingly. He did not update his behavior at the 7th hour, because his behavior at the 7th hour was the behavior appropriate to someone doing archival work in the archive at the 7th hour, and the identity of the other person present at the 7th hour did not change what the appropriate behavior was. The appropriate behavior was to do archival work, which was what he was there to do, and to be in the room without requiring the room to accommodate him beyond the accommodation of the space and the documents. He continued to come to the archive at the 7th hour. She continued to come to the archive at the 7th hour. They continued to be at opposite ends of the long reading table, and he continued to read with the absorption he brought to things that deserved absorption, and she continued to read with the absorption of someone who had found a place where absorption was possible, and neither of them required anything of the other. This continued for 3/7 hours before she said anything, and what she said was not directed at him specifically, but was the kind of comment that a room sometimes generates when something in it produces a thought that arrives in spoken form before the social calculation has decided whether speaking is appropriate. She said, apparently to the document she was reading rather than to him, "They get this period wrong in the formal histories." He looked up from his own document, because a statement about a period of the archive's history being wrong in the formal histories was the kind of statement that was professionally relevant to him. He said, "Which period?" She looked at him, apparently registering that she had spoken aloud in the presence of another person, with the expression of someone who has done something without planning it and is assessing the consequences. Then she said, "The third generation's resource disputes. The formal histories treat them as administrative failures. They were actually negotiations." He looked at the document in front of him, which was from the third collection, and was about the third generation's resource disputes. He said, "I know. I've been reading this for the last week." She looked at him with the expression of someone who has expected a different response and is reassessing the expected response in light of the actual one. He said, "The resolution protocols are the evidence. You don't develop resolution protocols that's sophisticated for administrative failures. You develop them for negotiations you expect to continue." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The formal histories were written under the 4th generation, who needed the 3rd generation's disputes to be failures rather than negotiations for political reasons that are documented elsewhere in the archive, and that nobody reads together." He said, "I know that too. It's in the 4th collection's administrative correspondence. The connection isn't made in the standard literature, because the standard literature was compiled by people working from the formal histories rather than from the primary sources." She looked at him for a longer moment than the previous looks had been. The assessment in the look was not the assessment of a princess examining a court member or a diplomatic representative. It was the assessment of someone who has encountered a person who knows something they know and is trying to determine the quality of the knowing. He returned to his document because the return was the natural next thing, the thing that the conversation's completion suggested, and that did not require management. He was not managing the conversation. He was in it the way he was in the archive, present, attending, and without agenda beyond the work. She returned to her document. The 7th hour completed, she departed. He continued working. He thought briefly about what she had said, the thing about the formal histories and the 4th generation's political reasons, and found that the brief thought produced a specific kind of satisfaction, which was the satisfaction of accurate information arriving from an unexpected source, which was the best kind of unexpected, because it confirmed that the work of finding accurate information was worth doing even when the finding was solitary. He went asleep that night thinking about the third collection's resource disputes, which was where his work was, and which was a good place for his thoughts to be. The fourth, seventh hour was when she asked him a question that was not about the archive. She asked it with the quality of someone testing whether a thing was possible rather than assuming it was, the question of someone who has found that things she thought were possible weren't, and who has learned to test rather than assume. She said, "Do you like this work?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, which was the seriousness of someone who had been asked something genuine and was going to answer it genuinely. He said, "Yes, I like work that has a long time scale. Documents last longer than the people who made them and longer than the reasons they were made, and working with them has a quality that most other work doesn't have, which is that the thing you're doing is going to matter after the immediate context has changed. I find that clarifying." She absorbed this. She said, "Clarifying how?" He said, "When the immediate context is the measure of whether something matters, then the immediate context changes determine the thing's value. Documents that outlast their context matter in a way that is independent of the immediate context, which means working with them is independent of it too. I can be uncertain about what a given day's work will produce and still be certain that the work has a value that doesn't depend on what the day produces." She was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when she was doing something with what she had heard rather than simply receiving it. She said, "I don't have many things that are independent of the immediate context." He said, "No. I imagine most things in your position are very dependent on it." She looked at him. He said it with the quality of someone making an accurate observation rather than performing sympathy, and she received it as such, which meant she received it as something that was true rather than as something that was being offered to produce a response. She said, "Yes." He returned to his document. She returned to hers. But the quality of the seventh hour had changed slightly, in the way of rooms where two people have exchanged something genuine, and the exchange has slightly altered what the room is. In the fifth, seventh hour she brought a document from the archive's restricted collection, which she had access to and he did not, and she said, "There's something in here you should see for the project." He said, "I appreciate that." She showed him the document. It was from the early period of the imperial administrative tradition and contained a record of the resource management principles that had preceded the Middle Period's disputes, the principles that the disputes had been negotiating against rather than simply failing to implement. He looked at it with the absorption he brought to documents that changed his understanding of the larger picture, because this document did that, and he made notes with the care he gave to notes, and she watched him read with the quality of someone who has offered something and is observing whether the offering was received as what it was. It was received as what it was, because he read it as what it was and noted what it changed in his understanding of the Middle Period's record and said, when he looked up, "This connects the third and first collections in a way the standard literature doesn't recognize. The story of the administrative tradition isn't linear, it's a conversation across generations." She said, "Yes. I've thought that for a long time," he said. "Have you published it anywhere?" She looked at him with the expression of someone encountering a category error. He said, "I'm asking seriously. This is a significant interpretive contribution to the historical record." She said, "I'm the princess." He said, "And you've been reading the primary sources for 8 months and have developed an understanding of the archive that is more accurate than the published literature. Those two things are both true." She was quiet for a long time. He did not fill the quiet because the quiet was hers and filling it would have been managing it rather than allowing it to be what it was. She said, eventually, "No, I haven't published it." He said, "You could." She said, "Not under my own name. The court's publication protocol requires review of any public scholarly contributions from members of the imperial line." He said, "The review exists to catch political content. Historical archival scholarship about administrative records from the early imperial period is unlikely to be flagged as political content. She said, "No, it's unlikely to be flagged. It's likely to be slow and to require justification of why the princess is producing archival scholarship, rather than focusing on ceremonial and administrative obligations. And the justification would make the work a political matter by virtue of requiring the justification." He said, "That's accurate." She said, "Yes." He said, "It's also a shame because the work is good and the archive should have it." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, with the quality of something that had been sitting for a long time and was being examined in a new light, "I know it's good." He said, "I know you know. That's not a question." She absorbed this, the straightforwardness of it, the absence of the qualified statement that would have softened the assertion's clarity, the simple acknowledgement of her expertise as a fact rather than as something to be hedged or qualified or framed as a compliment. He had not said it to produce a response. He had said it because it was accurate, and accuracy was the thing he brought to documents, and to statements about documents, and to statements about people who understood documents. The 7th hour completed, and she left with the quality that was the same as every departure, but was carrying something different in it now, which was the specific weight of being known accurately by someone who had no motive for the accuracy beyond the accuracy itself. By the 7th hour, the archive's eastern section at the 7th hour had become a specific kind of room, which was the kind of room that two people create between them when they have been in it together enough times without agenda, that the room has acquired a quality that it doesn't have when they are not in it, which is the quality of a space that is also, in some sense, a relationship. Rin was aware of this in the practical way he was aware of most things, which was as a fact about the current situation that was relevant to navigating the current situation accurately. The fact was, the 7th hour had become something that was his and also hers and also neither of theirs specifically, because it belonged to the archive and to the hour, and to the quality of two people in a room without agenda, and the quality could not be owned but could be inhabited, and they were inhabiting it. Lira was aware of this in a different way, which was the way of someone who had been without the thing for long enough that having it produced a specific kind of noticing. Not the noticing of a new thing but the noticing of an absence being filled, which was quieter than the noticing of a new thing, and in certain respects, more profound. In the 7th hour, she said, "I have been coming to this room for 8 months. He said, "I know." She said, "In 8 months before you I never said anything to anyone in this room. I came here to not say anything." He said, "I think I understood that." She said, "You didn't change it by coming." He said, "I was here for the documents." She said, "I know. That's why you didn't change it." He looked at her with the quality of someone who has heard something and is giving it the attention it deserves rather than the attention a response would require. She said, "Everyone who enters a room I am in comes for something. The protocol officers come to manage my schedule. The court advisors come to manage my impression of things. The diplomatic representatives come to manage my sense of their mission's value. Even the people who are kind, and some of them are genuinely kind, are kind in the direction of something. Their kindness is aimed at an outcome, which is my favorable impression of them, or my cooperation with their function, or my comfort so that I am easier to manage." She said, "You came for the documents. And then you spoke to me when the speaking was natural and were quiet when it wasn't. And you disagreed with the formal histories without asking whether I agreed with the formal histories first. And you told me my work was good without framing it as encouragement because you weren't trying to encourage me. You were accurately describing the work." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I have not had many experiences of being accurately described." He said, "You are accurately describable. That's not a quality everyone has." She looked at him. He said it with the tone of someone making an observation about a fact, which was the tone he brought to accurate observations. And she received it with the expression of someone who has been given a specific kind of gift, without being aware the specific kind existed. Not the gift of praise, not the gift of admiration, but the gift of being seen precisely rather than warmly, which was more sustaining than warmth in the specific way that accurate things were more sustaining than comfortable ones. In the 7th hour, she brought the document she had been thinking about for 3 years. She set it on the table between them without preamble and said, "This is the thing I mentioned. The one about the period the formal histories get wrong for political reasons." He looked at the document. It was from the restricted collection, and was from the period immediately preceding the 4th generation. The period whose characterization in the formal histories had been, as she had identified in their first real conversation, the product of the 4th generation's political needs rather than the period's actual character. The document was a record of decisions made in that period that the formal histories had either omitted or reframed, and the decisions, read in their actual form rather than their reframed form, changed the meaning of the subsequent period significantly. Changed the story the court had been telling about its own administrative history for several generations. He read it carefully. He read it the way he read everything, with the full absorption of someone for whom reading was a form of presence, and for whom presence was the most fundamental thing he could offer to a document or to a person. He said when he looked up, "This changes the narrative the court has maintained about the 4th generation's legitimacy." She said, "Yes." He said, "You've known this for 3 years." She said, "Yes." He said, "And you haven't been able to do anything with it." She said, "No. The document is real and the implications are real, and they are both things that the court's political situation does not have room for, and I am a part of the court's political situation, and the part I am in it does not include the option of introducing accurate information that destabilizes the narrative the court has organized itself around." He said, "That must be a specific kind of weight." She said, "It is. Knowing something true that you cannot use is a very particular form of isolation." He said, "I'm going to include a reference to this document in the mission's archival report. Not the implications, the existence. The report will note that the document exists and is uncatalogued in the standard bibliography, and that its contents are relevant to the period's administrative record. The report will go into the Joint Commission's archive, where it will be available to scholars who are looking for primary sources on the period." She said, "That doesn't resolve the political implications." He said, "No. But it means the document is in the scholarly record, which means the implications can be reached by someone who isn't inside the court's political situation and therefore isn't constrained by it." She was quiet for a long time. He let the quiet be what it was. She said, "You're not doing that for me specifically." He said, "I'm doing it because the document is real and the record should contain it. The fact that you're the person who showed it to me doesn't change what the document is." She said, "I know. That's why it matters that you're doing it." In the 7th hour, he came to the archive and found that she was already there, which had not happened in the previous 10 7th hours. In the previous 10, she had arrived after him, because his schedule brought him to the archive before the 7th hour on most days, and he was already in the eastern section when she arrived. She was sitting at the far end of the table in the position she always occupied, with a document he did not recognize, and she looked up when he came in with the quality of someone who has been waiting and is registering that the waiting is complete. He sat at his end of the table and located the document he was working with and opened it to the section he had been in the day before, and the 7th hour proceeded in the way the 7th hours had been proceeding, which was with the quality of two people in a room who were present to each other in the specific way that had been building across 10 shared hours. Toward the end of the 11th 7th hour, she said, "The project ends in 2 weeks." He said, "Yes." She said, "I've been thinking about what happens after." He said, "I'll complete the archival report and submit it through the Joint Commission's channels. The documentation will be thorough." She said, "That's not what I was thinking about." He said, "I know." She looked at him. He was still looking at the document, not because the document was more important than what she had said, but because the document was where he had been, and the natural thing was to be where you had been until the thing being said required you to be somewhere else, which this did, so he looked up. He said, "What were you thinking about?" She said, "I was thinking that 12/7 hours is not a long time in the context of an imperial archive's 300-year history, and is a very long time in the context of certain other things." He said, "That's accurate." She said, "I was thinking about the restricted collection's uncatalogued documents, which are more numerous than the standard bibliography suggests, and which represent a gap in the scholarly record that a more thorough documentation project might address." He said, "That would require an extension of the mission's archive access." She said, "Archive access extensions are processed through the court's administrative channels as standard diplomatic accommodations. They have no political significance and therefore move quickly." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I would need to identify the scope of the documentation project for the mission's brief." "An uncatalogued restricted collection is a significant scope." She said, 3 months minimum, possibly 6. He said, "That's a significant extension." She said, "It's a significant collection." He looked at her with the full attention he had been bringing to the archive's documents, and to her observations about the archive's documents, and to her specifically, in the way that the 12/7 hours had built, the quality of someone who is attending to a thing, because the thing is worth attending to and for no other reason. He said, "I'll submit the extension request, S."